Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Golov, Marketing Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we'll make them available on our website. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. We serve a very broad client base, spanning across all industries. Today, we are thrilled to introduce Amber Swope, DITA Specialist of DITA Strategies. Amber is an internationally recognized expert on DITA who specializes in helping teams develop their information architecture and implement DITA. With over 20 years of experience in the information development field and 12 years of DITA expertise, Amber helps teams design and optimize their environments to improve efficiency and reduce costs. When she's not busy helping to change the world with XML, she can be found playing soccer, walking her pupster, and enjoying Portland, Oregon. We also like to introduce Dawn Stevens, President of Contact Services, a content management and information design firm based in Denver, Colorado. Dawn is also Director of the Center for Information Development Management, a membership organization focused on content management and information development best practices. With over 25 years of experience, including 15 years at Contact, Dawn has practical experience in virtually every role within a documentation and training department, including project management, instructional design, writing, editing, and multimedia programming. With both engineering and technical communication degrees, Dawn combines a solid technical foundation with strong writing and design skills to identify and remove the challenges her clients face in producing usable technical information and training. Without further ado, welcome Amber and Dawn.
Thank you, Adam. So this is Amber. I'm going to be starting first, and I'm attempting to go to the next slide. And it doesn't seem to be working, so could I have the next slide, please, Adam? All right, so we're going to start off with a poll to get a sense of why you might be attending this webinar. So I'm going to read off the questions, and we'd like you to respond so that we have a sense of what information we can focus on so that this is a valuable experience for you. The first question is, first of all, what is your goal? And the first option is to use DITA for other content, and you want to know how it supports learning and training. The second option is that you don't use DITA right now, but are partnering with a learning and training group and you want to share a common architecture. The third option is that you create learning and training content in traditional tools and want to know more about DITA and what it has to offer. And the fourth option is that you don't yet create any learning and training content, but you will be asked to do so in the future and you want to do so efficiently, or if there's another reason why you're attending. So Adam has the poll up, and we'll look forward to hearing about who you are and what you are looking forward to learning from us.
So Amber, with about 64% of the attendees voting, we have 47% use DITA for other content and want to know how it supports learning and training. About 21% use it to create learning and training in traditional tools and want to know about DITA. And we'll give it a couple more seconds. It's been changing. We have about 85% have voted.
Awesome. This is so helpful.
And so let me close the poll now. And what we have is the final answers is 49% use DITA for other content and want to know how it supports learning and training. 20% create learning and training in traditional tools and want to know about DITA. 16% answered don't yet create learning and training, but want to do so efficiently in the future. 11% responded other, and then 4% responded don't use DITA now, but we are partnering with a learning and training and want to share a common architecture.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, that helps me understand who you are and why you're here, and that's really helpful. So Dawn and I have prepared a presentation to walk through how DITA, out of the box, supports learning and training. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page, this slide shows a grossly simplified architecture for content. And the important thing here is that most learning content is now designed to be very modular. So in this diagram, it shows that you have modules. One module maybe for overview, might have another module for assessment, and that you also have related information. You have this supporting information, activity sheets, student materials, etc. And like I said, this isn't to indicate that all your content is this simple, but the fact that it's in modules and you have these other items that need to be associated with that content means that you have potentially a challenge creating and maintaining this information. So I want to talk a little bit about modules. So when I think about a module, particularly for learning, I think of it as more of a standalone unit that could potentially, not necessarily, but potentially be delivered separately. And different modules may have different purposes, and but they would, in most of the time, have a fairly similar structure. So the first thing you would want to do is make sure that you set the expectations of the learner by telling them the objectives, what they need to know before they get started, and set their expectations for success. Then you include your learning content and have learning activities. Maybe you do some exercises. Maybe there's some assessment in this section as well, but you may have something where it's you just have them check some true false to make sure they get some confidence. You go into your learning activities. Not every unit has assessment, but if you are in an environment where you are going for certification or some type of tracked analytics about how people perform, then you will have assessment. And then ideally, we'd love to have some feedback as well as a summary to say, okay, well, if you've completed this successfully, here's what you should feel capable to do, and here would be the next steps. And so when you look at a module, you're like, okay, that's what's in it. Well, there's associated information along with that information. And those supporting materials could be myriad. You might have instructor guides, you might have student guides, group activities, assignments, you might have planning. And a large part of folks have is assessment. And some of these might be video. You might actually have textbooks. You have slides potentially for instructor-led content that corresponds to information that is related, but maybe not identical when you deliver it in an LMS, because those environments are different, and instructor-led training is much more interactive. If someone's taking the same course in an LMS, they might share some of the same content, but it's not exactly the same course. So when you look at this and you say, wow, we have lots of courses, we have lots of different deliverable targets, we have different types of training, are these opportunities or are these challenges? I jokingly refer that in the bad old days when it was simply instructor-led training and you made all your materials ahead of time and you put the binders together and you shipped them off to wherever you were doing the training, yeah, it wasn't great, but there was one training type. Now, this is not the case. You're expected to provide learning experiences in a variety of different ways. And that means that you have, whether you think of it as an opportunity or challenge, the following 4 points. The first is that you need to have the same content be available on different deliverables, that you are asked potentially to provide customized learning, and then to deliver the same training content for different experiences and potentially support personalized delivery. And I'm going to go through these key points, and then Dawn is going to follow up and talk about how DITA helps you turn these, if they are challenges for you, into opportunities. So let's quickly talk about reusing content in different deliverables. So the key thing for a consistent learning experience is consistent content. If I am taking a course and I have information that I'm accessing online as well as in a classroom setting, if that information is not consistent, it has a definite impact on my ability to learn the content, as well as my confidence that, oh, wow, if it's not consistent in my materials, how worthwhile is this learning experience? And there's all kinds of information that you need to have that could be the same in multiple deliverables. And I'll start off with a list of some of these things. So key concepts, even though the exercise for learning or demonstrating a key concept might be different if I'm doing it on an online experience versus in a live classroom experience, the reality is that the information about the key points potentially could be reusable so that it remains consistent. Learning objectives. In some cases, it is appropriate for the same learning objective to appear in multiple deliverables. For instance, in an LMS or in an instructor guide. If you have textbooks, if you're a learning publisher, an educational publisher, and you have a textbook, those learning objectives need to be the same if they are reading the textbook versus following along in the LMS. Assessments. If you have an environment where you need to be able to deliver assessment online, for instance in an LMS, but also need to have practice tests, well, you may need to be able to either present the same questions in the same order in order to get them passed by a regulatory body, or you may have to have control so that you can present them differently depending on the environment. I'm going to talk briefly about microlearning because everywhere I go, I keep hearing buzz about microlearning. It's the big word that I've been hearing for the last couple of years in the learning space. And it's not just about having shorter learning experiences. It's not that you just take one of your modules and release it separately. The point of it, in my mind, is that you create another flavor, for lack of a better word, of that content, and you may say that your regular course has 3 learning objectives per module. For microlearning, we're going to make essentially mini modules, 1 for each learning objective. You can only do that if you are able to easily reuse that same information so that you can have that flexibility and not end up creating multiple instances of your source. It might be okay to do it for the first time, but when you go to update that, it's so much easier if you're updating one place rather than going and finding it in multiple places. So, I'm going to head into another poll. So this poll is, do you provide customized content for your clients or partners? And we have 4 potential answers. This time the answers all fit on the screen, so I don't know that I need to read them to you. But what I mean by customized training really quickly is that it's information that if you present it for your company, but you have a client, that you may change the name, the branding, maybe how it looks, the style sheets, that they may actually, that's the branding part of it, but they also might have different content that is either augmented to the original course that's theirs, or they might even replace some of what your content is with something that is specific to them. So that's what I mean by customized content. How are we doing, Adam?
So with about 60% of the attendees responding, Amber, 75% have said yes, rebranding and different content. 16% answered no, no business requirement. And then a combination of 5% each, yes, rebranding only, and no requirement, but can't do it with current technology. And we have about, right now, 70% of the attendees voted.
Okay, great. I'll give it just another moment if folks want to be able to register your input. And this is, you know, a lot of times you have the requirement, but if you've created your content in different delivery specific tools, this can be really challenging because you have different instances of all that content. Oops, I'm trying to go to the next slide. And there we go. So what I mean by this is that if I created content that has my company's brand on it, let's say I'm company A, and I have two clients, company B and company C, and maybe company D, maybe I have three, and they take my content. Well, at a minimum, they're probably going to strip out my company name and my product names and put in their company name and their product names, and they're going to rebrand it so that it looks like their templates and their fonts and their colors, etc. Well, then they could even take it and do more with it. Maybe it looks different in, maybe it's an OEM, and they have then passed that content on and they add more content to it, or they change it and make it look different. When you look at the branding, a lot of times you can do that with variables. So if you, instead of actually typing in a product name or a company name, you use a variable, and then you can swap that in or out based upon where it's going. How it looks can a lot of times be handled through CSS. That's the entry ticket to this customization. The real challenge comes when you have to have additional content, or they need to replace your content with other content. So for instance, the course, let's say the course you created is about corporate security, and you have all the best practices around how to create passwords. Well, maybe your company B actually has a very specific requirement around passwords that you didn't have. They may need to take out your guidance and replace it with their guidance for their people. So it's more than just how it looks. And this can be challenging if you do not have a single source. So in that situation, I have, like I said, I have my variables, I'm able to rebrand it, and I need to have a way to swap content in and out. And if you are creating your content in large units, like an entire module in a single file, that can be really difficult. And that's where getting to a lower level of granularity gives you a lot more power. And Dawn will talk a bit about that when we talk about DITA. So I wanted to bring up a poll that DCL did with DITA Strategies in the fall of 2017, and there's information about this poll, the survey rather, at the end of this presentation. And one of the questions we asked was, by what methods do you deliver materials? And as you can see, folks checked, it said out of 127 respondents, a lot of people said that they have a lot of different requirements in terms of how they actually deliver their content. This means that if you've customized it, let's say you customized it for branding and for content, and then you have to provide it for printed materials as well as the slide presentation. You have to update your videos. You have to then make sure that your online course also reflects all the changes that were in the printed materials and in the slides. If you are not in a single source, but rather are creating content in the deliverable tool, so you have an instance of the content in the LMS, you have an instance in InDesign, if you're doing textbooks, you have an instance in PowerPoint, etc., that customization challenge just became exponentially more difficult. Another one of the questions we asked is, what devices are you delivering the training on? And as you can see, desktop is still the king here, but we're seeing phone and tablets. I was surprised that tablet wasn't a lot greater than phone, which is really fascinating, because if you're delivering a learning experience on a phone, that means you have to be incredibly cognizant of how the content fits on that limited real estate. And we'll talk a bit about this. How do you deliver personalized training? So this is slightly different than customized training. And what I mean by personalized training is that you are able to provide a different learning experience based upon the learner themselves. So if I log in and take a course, and Dawn logs in and takes a course, that there's some way to ascertain that Dawn might know more about something than I do, and so that she should be able to have a course that doesn't require her to go through all the information she doesn't know, or that she has an area that she needs more knowledge in that I may already know, and that I don't have to go through that same content. So to me, personalized training is very different than customized, and it's around that experience that the individual learner has. And I'm seeing this more and more as a requirement in the training space, that one size does not fit all anymore. So how are we doing, Adam?
So Amber, with about 60% of the attendees voting, 43% have said no, no business, there is no business requirement. 39% have said yes, and 15% have said no requirement, but can't do it with current architecture. And right now there's about 70% of the attendees voted. Okay,
great. All right, we'll let that go for just a moment more, and then I'll move on so that folks have a chance to. All right, I'm gonna take back control here. Oops. Yep. So the key to personalized delivery is learning objectives, and what I have found is that depending on the formality and maturity of the learning organization and their methodology depends upon the role of learning objectives. There are some folks who essentially simply have knowledge transfer, and at the beginning they say, hey, at the end of this you're going to know how to do X, and you're like, okay, that's great. And there's no assessment. It's literally a checkbox that yes, they were presented with the information. However, if you want to go, for instance, for personalized learning, you need to have learning objectives. And this pyramid represents one of the flavors of Bloom's. And I say one of the flavors because depending on which organization you're in, you might be using a different flavor of Bloom's, or potentially another classification of learning objectives. But I should be able to log in and take a test, a pre-assessment, and say, oh, I'm able to show that I understand something, but I'm not able to apply it. Then when I take the course, don't present me the content that's associated with helping me understand. Present me with the module that helps me learn to apply it better. And you only get this with the association of learning objectives to your content. And like I said, I think that most of the folks that are in the learning space totally understand this dependency. If I want to determine current knowledge or identify skills, I have to have this mapping from the content to the learning objectives. And it's not just at the assessment level. The mapping also occurs for that instructional content, so that I get the right experience, that I get the right exercises depending on which level of knowledge I am able to display. And give me only what I need. Don't give me what I think of as punitive learning, which is everybody gets the same thing, and it doesn't matter how much I already knew coming in. I have to sit through every single piece of the learning that was designed for the person who knew nothing about this coming in. I kind of equate this to the everyone gets an extra large t-shirt, because in theory extra large fits everyone. Well, the reality is that it might fit everyone, but it doesn't fit them well. And learning, we can do better now. And it relies on that instructional design premise of your learning objectives. So in addition to your learning objectives, if you do not have a way to track the information, then it is also more difficult to do the personalized learning. So a key to this is an LMS, and another survey result was we asked folks, and what was interesting is of the respondents to the survey, over half of them are not currently in an LMS, which means that their ability to track based upon who I am and maybe what I've learned before is limited without the capabilities that an LMS gives you, in that it takes your content and allows you to be able to know, oh, Amber registered, Amber's taken these other courses, she can take a pre-assessment, she tests out of these modules, she takes those modules and that she doesn't know, and then gets to have the full assessment experience that is graded, and then based on that I can get feedback that, oh, Amber, maybe you need to do a refresher exercise from this other module. An LMS, as the folks who are in the learning industry know, that this is a really powerful way to enhance that learning experience. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to Dawn, and she's going to talk about how DITA can help with this.
Great, thank you, Amber. So you can see we've changed this slide. You've seen it before. We've changed it now from is it an opportunity or a challenge to just it is, as we see it, an opportunity that we can use DITA to address, to help you respond to each of these different opportunities. So what I'm going to do, just like Amber said, is I'm going to take a look at these opportunities that she's done such a great job of describing the challenges and setting those up as opportunities. I'm going to take a look at how DITA really helps us resolve each of these and respond to the opportunity. So, oops, go back up, sorry. Okay, so it sounded like in our initial poll that everybody has some familiarity with DITA. So this is kind of just the basic slide to set up. If you don't have familiarity with DITA, what are we talking about? Ultimately, DITA is a modular, structured XML framework. It's an architecture that is based on topics. And in DITA 1.2, which was a couple of releases ago, the learning and training specialization was introduced into the entire architecture to support people who were developing learning and training types of materials. In the latest version 1.3, some additional changes were made to improve that initial foray into learning and training. And Amber and I are co-chairs of the Learning and Training Subcommittee in OASIS, and we're working now towards looking to the next release of DITA and what can we be doing to help address the challenges that people are facing in developing their learning and training with DITA. So we're continuing to look to improve. But what I'm going to talk about, at least right now, is what's currently available. So what I want to highlight to start with is just simply what parts of DITA are the key pieces, as I see it, to solve the opportunities that Amber has been presenting. So we're going to talk a little bit about just the architecture in general, what kinds of maps and topic types are available to us, because that's a key aspect of delivering customized training and to different outputs. We're going to talk again about learning objectives and how DITA addresses those. We'll take a quick look at the different reuse mechanisms that would enable our opportunities and talk very briefly about the DITA Open Toolkit and the transforms that we would need in order to be able to deliver to different media and so forth. So to start with, the learning and training specialization encompasses actually learning maps and 5 additional topic types, of which I've only got 4 listed here. The learning plan is not a key aspect to what we're talking about today, so I have left it out. But what we've got here is of course, the map, which, as we know from just any type of DITA implementation, a map is the piece that's going to organize all of our content. So a learning map is going to organize our content into our modules, our lessons, our courses, the entire curriculum. We'll have different levels of maps that pull our content in. And then, kind of the basis of training in general is to start off by telling you what we're going to tell you about, then we're going to tell it to you, and then we're going to tell you what we just told you. And that's what we see in the learning overview, the learning content, and the learning summary. The overview is that setup. Here's what we're going to teach you. The learning content provides the actual content that we're trying to teach with direct use of the other DITA topic types that we know about, tasks and concepts and reference, troubleshooting, glossary, all of those different topic types we can directly use into our learning content. And then the learning summary recaps what we just taught you with learning content. And then, of course, at the end, if necessary, we can do that assessment to measure the learner's performance against the objectives that we had set. So those topic types are critical to us being able to address any of the opportunities that we've talked about. And within each of those topic types, is a common element. That is the critical aspect. Amber talked about objectives really being the key to being able to address many of these opportunities. And DITA has this element called LC objectives, which in turn includes a STEM that will introduce the objectives, and then a group that can contain any number of objectives for a particular course or module or lesson. And so these objectives are defining exactly what this content is going to teach the student, and it's the basis for which we want to build our courses, the basis on which we're going to test the results. And so it is critical that the LC objectives element is actually available in every single one of our learning types within DITA. So the overview topic type, learning content topic type, summary, assessments, each one of those has available to it the LC objectives element. And that allows us to categorize our content essentially in kind of like a metadata way of saying this content supports this specific objective. So when we go to build courses that may share specific objectives, we're able to find easily in our repository the content that has to do with that specific objective and include it into each of the different maps or each of the different courses that we would be creating that might share those specific objectives. We also want to just quickly acknowledge the reuse mechanisms that are available in DITA to any kind of information, whether it's learning or just regular technical communication. So these are also going to be critical aspects of our opportunities. We can just take a single map and we can compile it into different types of output. So we can compile from that pool that Amber was talking about earlier and the different types of content, whether we're talking about PDFs or HTML5. For example, if we're publishing to an LMS and needing to publish to potentially a SCORM output, we can take that map and we can publish it for each of those different outputs just by using a different transform. And of course, as I've already been talking about, we can also build separate maps that point to common topics that are covering a specific objective. Those topics would be shared by multiple maps, building multiple different types of courses. But if we're not, maybe we don't want to share entire topics between our courses, maybe there's only small portions, maybe even just a little less than an objective worth of content. We of course have the DITA reuse mechanisms that allow us to address those as well, of being able to just take smaller bites of content, maybe just a paragraph or a list or a small section, and reuse just that content as opposed to an entire topic. We can certainly do that. And we can set up conditional processing to filter content. So if we have content that is only for a particular type of student or certain level of knowledge that those students have, if we start talking about personalized training, we may have some conditional processing set up in order to provide that experience. And as Amber also alluded to in some of her initial discussions, we may set up variables to change out things like branding, product names, those types of things that would give us those more customized content for our different clients. So pretty much every DITA reuse mechanism that's available has an applicability to our opportunities that we're talking about here. And then finally, the last key aspect of being able to respond to these opportunities is the DITA Open Toolkit that allows us to take this content, run it through transforms for different types of output. And we've talked about the LMS output. That might be a SCORM compatible output. We may send it to something like HTML5, or we still may have our traditional PDF and EPUB kind of printed type of content to create student workbooks or things like that. We may also have a transform to PowerPoint and slides that that we need to present in an instructor-led training course. So all of those are possible through the DITA Open Toolkit and creating the appropriate transforms. So that sets the stage back for these opportunities. So let's look at these opportunities in detail and look at some specific examples within DITA how we can respond to each of these. So the first, of course, is that just reusing the content in different deliverables. That is, we've got a repository of a lot of learning content. They may be conceptual pieces, they may be task-oriented instructions of we're teaching a process, teaching a way to do something. It may include a bunch of assessment questions. And we've got this repository of all these different types of topics. And now all we want to do is build different courses from those based on the objectives that they cover. And so we end up with multiple courses using that same collection of content. But not just at that task or at the topic level, but we can see even in this illustration the smaller pieces of content that maybe we've pulled out of a larger topic. That might be in a case where we're publishing instructor materials, but the instructor needs to know, well, what is it that's in the student guide right now that the student is looking at? So we want to include the student content in the instructor guide. We don't want to include the instructor content in the student guide. So we will reference only small portions of the base topic into our overall course. We may want to create something that spans multiple courses where we have a certification test from that. We have many courses to get you to that certification. Now we want to compile a test with assessment questions from every single one of those courses together. So these are all different possibilities from really a reuse perspective that we're able to handle with DITA. So again, same kinds of things as we were talking about. We can compile those maps based on a specific objective. So here is all the content. Maybe there's some conceptual information that supports the objective. Maybe there's some reference information that supports the objective. We can take the overview that introduces those objectives, put the content with it, put a summary with it, all into a single map, and then take that map as really a small module, a small piece of an overall lesson or course, and then just reuse that map in multiple places rather than have to always rebuild and bring in every single one of the topics. That might be one approach. We may have one map that we want to use to generate multiple different courses from that same map. And we use things like conditionalization at the map level to, as we process that map multiple times, set the conditions differently and end up creating multiple courses out of one single map. Of course, we still have that availability to conref just small segments of content into some unique topics. So we're not maybe teaching the entire objective, just a small portion of something. Maybe it's because our audience is at a different level, so we don't need the entire basic amount of content that we would do to teach somebody who'd never heard of this particular thing before. We just need to maybe have a reminder, so we're going to only take a small portion and just conref in that small section. And again, we may compile all of our assessments from multiple places into one place for an entire course assessment, and not just at each individual lesson level, but the entire course would assess how is everybody doing. So here's an example. We have two courses. I'm using photography examples here today. So I have a course that is using the manual mode on my digital camera, so it's a bit more system oriented. I'm just teaching you how to use your camera, kind of orienting you to each of your different settings on your dial. But I also have a course that's called Taking Pictures in Low Light. So here it's more focused on a particular outcome that you want to have with your camera. One is, so the first course is just teach me about my basics on my camera. The other one is teach me to get certain results using my camera. But both of those have some common objectives here. That is things like setting your aperture, setting your shutter speed, setting the ISO speed. You're going to be setting each of these things using your manual mode. So from that manual mode perspective, I need to understand how to rotate my dials and get to those particular values. But from the taking pictures in low light, I need to understand how those impact the outcome that I'm going to get from taking a picture when my aperture is set to a particular value at the same time that my shutter speed is set to another value. So in each map, I have common topics that I have referenced in both places. And yet then the final assessment in each case, I have a map ref to two separate assessments. Those assessment maps, however, probably have very similar questions when it comes to aperture, shutter speed, and ISO in both of them. And then the remainders of those assessments differ based on, of course, the course that they're in. Right? And it's interesting, since Amber mentioned microlearning, to just point out that any one of these individual things, setting aperture, setting shutter speed, and so forth, could actually become a microlearning offering as well. Now, secondly, our second challenge or opportunity is to provide customized learning, where we are doing things like changing the brands or the logos, maybe providing some unique examples based on, well, if you're in this industry, these examples would apply. If you're in another industry, these other examples would apply. So that depending on who's looking at the course, still the same objectives, still the same basic learning content, but we're going to change out some things, maybe look and feel, maybe some of these examples or the branding and so forth, so that each client ends up with a different experience. Maybe we're going to hide options if our client didn't maybe buy all aspects of our product. When they take the training, they don't want to be trained on the things they didn't buy, so we're going to suppress those particular things. Maybe they've customized their screen in some manner with you, so the product is a little bit different depending on what company you're using it at. So maybe those screenshots are going to change based on that overall implementation. So we can do things a couple of different ways here within DITA. We can use keys or variables to define which of maybe a selection of content is included when the content is processed. So here I have a key, and I have 3 possible values for my key, and when I process my output, I'm going to say set my key to, in this case, the red output, and so it will put the content that is the red value in at this time. Versus something where we're using maybe conditional processing, where all the content is in the content to start with. It's conditionalized, and at the processing time, I'm going to say, you know what, don't show me anything that has to do with red content. Include only the blue and the green content in this particular output. So in one case, I'm selecting what I want to put in some cases, I'm kind of selecting, leaving certain things out. But both of those are viable options for us to provide that customized learning experience in terms of what the consumer is ultimately going to be seeing. So what does this look like? Here I am with, maybe I'm teaching my photography class, but people might be bringing different cameras to that photography class, and so I have one that's specifically, it looks like Canon here, and so in my training, potentially on my teaching people about their cameras, I have maybe a topic about specifications, and what I'm doing is I'm going to set at the time that I build my course which key file, which value of all of my variables which file contains the right values for those. So my specifications file is going to come in here and read, okay, in this case I've set the key file. My brand is going to say Canon, so I'm going to get Canon specifications, and then I'm going to get a picture that will have my Canon picture, and I'm going to have a weight that has what the weight of my particular Canon camera is, and again my megapixels. So I can bring in specifically for that course, when I build that course for Canon, all of the Canon specifications, but when I build that exact same course, I've changed nothing but the key file. I can now make that a course for maybe a Nikon or a Kodak, or any type of brand camera. Again, my objectives are still exactly the same. The course itself has not changed at all. All I'm doing is changing some very specific pieces that make it unique to that particular camera owner, that makes it apply directly to their particular camera that they have in their hands at that time. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and skip this poll, Adam, just from a time perspective, and we'll just continue on. So then our third challenge is to deliver different learning experiences. So we have that same content, regardless of whether we're getting it from an instructor-led training or some kind of facilitated web-based course, or maybe we're going to produce a self-paced workbook, or some kind of self-paced computer-based training. All of these different ways that people might learn the exact same content, but we want to output those in different ways. So again, this really is going to sit on the shoulders of our DITA Open Toolkit and the transforms that we can create, so that we can take that exact same map and process it to a variety of different output for those different learning experiences. And one of the things that DITA introduced in DITA 1.3 was the delivery type conditional attribute, which allows us specifically to say certain content may not be applicable to include in a particular output media form. So if we are producing some kind of self-paced booklet for somebody to go through, obviously they're not going to be able to watch video in some printed output. And so we may have still in our single map, we may have some video available that we're going to process when we process HTML5, but we're not going to want to process it when we're processing it to some kind of a PDF output, for example. And we can set the delivery type attribute on that video reference to indicate only try to process this, only include it when we're processing to HTML5. This example is just actually to say, what if we wanted to create an instructor guide and student guide from the exact same content? So we've got a map, it's the exact same map, but if I process this map for my instructor, I'm going to include some instructor notes at the beginning. And then even within the topics themselves, I may have some instructor notes here. For example, here's the instructions that the students are seeing: adjust the shutter speed, you can choose these values, blah, blah, blah. But the instructor is going to say, hey, if you've got time, the students can take a picture using every single shutter speed and compare the results. And that would be a great way to learn, the differences between shutter speeds. So we can take that same map and just use conditional processing with the audience attribute in this particular case to control what learning experiences are happening. Am I getting the learning experience of an instructor, or am I getting the learning experience of a student? Then the personalized learning, where we want to deliver only the content for based on the learner's current skill set and knowledge. So if they already have the information, we don't want to force them through that training again. We want to test them in some way, see where their starting point is, and get them all to the exact same ending point, but recognize that they all may be starting from someplace different. So here, what we may want to do is provide a pretest where we are feeding multiple questions that we've written as assessment questions in DITA to the user. If they're getting that question right, then they don't need to see that content in their course. If they get that question wrong, then we are going to build this course on the fly and only put in the content associated with those questions, those learning objectives, that those questions that share the LC objectives element with the learning content, and build in that course where they see only the content for what they did not know. So we can put in that pretest. So we can have this pre-question, which assesses the current knowledge. Do they know, which of these lenses has this particular f-stop? And there's actually several correct answers here. And what we can see here in our feedback is if the question is answered incorrectly, it's saying that you could use further instruction, and so you should go to this particular lesson. Whereas if you did get it right, there's just a confirmation, but there's no reference to them going to that training because they don't need it to that specific lesson. So I wanted to be able to allow enough time for questions, but just in summary, we've looked at these 4 potential challenges, seen how there are opportunities, and seen how DITA has viable solutions to being able to address those things that we've seen as common issues for instructional designers when they're trying to build content that they may not have great tools or architectures to support outside of DITA, and yet we've got some potential here with DITA to do each of these things, to reuse content in different deliverables, provide customized learning, different training experiences, and personalized delivery as well. So I think with that, we wanted to allow enough time for questions. I think is this now, Adam, I think time for anybody to ask Amber or I questions before you talk about the surveys.
Well, thank you. Thank the both of you. This was a very informative webinar indeed. And bear with me for a second. For some reason, my questions panel did not show up. So that is interesting. And I apologize for that. So with that being said, I'm sorry. I just had an issue. My apologies for that. At this time, we have no questions come in. So, Amber, if you want to discuss a little bit of the training and learning survey.
Sure. Thank you, Adam. And thank you, Dawn, for showing how DITA actually can be implemented to help folks with their learning challenges. So we did a survey, and we asked how, we wanted to understand what are folks trying to do with learning these days. And you can go and see the full infographic here at the URL at the bottom of the slide. And we will probably, we will be doing another round of the survey again, probably in the fall, because this was we did this before, and it's interesting to see the trends over time on where folks are being asked to do more. And unfortunately, what we've also found in the survey is people are being asked to do more with fewer resources and lower budgets, right? So if you are interested in participating in the survey, please let us know, because we would be happy to make sure that you are on that list when we put it out again.
Great, thank you. And of course, now some questions come in. So let me say the first one. And the first question that's come in is, what tools can be used to author DITA training?
So really, any of your mainstream DITA tools will support learning and training out of the box. So I don't want to, I always am afraid I'm going to leave tools out if I start to list them all. But basically, if you can author in DITA, then they should have the DTDs available for each of the different learning types, information types. Each of those has a separate DTD, and so those would be available in your tool. And if your tool doesn't happen to have those loaded, you can still get those DTDs and be able to reference those. You don't need a special tool. You can always author just straight in a text editor using those DTDs as well.
Great, thank you, Dawn. The next question that has come in is, how does DITA compare to Moodle, for example?
So, Amber, do you want to take that, or you want me to?
So I was going to say that Moodle is actually an LMS. It has some capabilities for creating content, and you know, I think it partially depends on how you use it. But if you need to have a single source of content, I have folks that have created their DITA content and then imported it into Moodle for display, so they get all the great features of Moodle for the delivery of the content, like any other LMS that maybe uses QTI as their XML for displaying the content and tracking the assessment and the learning experience. I don't know if you want to add something, Dawn?
I think you've covered it well. Really, I see Moodle and you know, any Moodle being if people aren't familiar with that, being a open source learning management system. All learning management systems will offer some kind of authoring capabilities, but from the kind of perspective that we've been talking about today, in terms of especially things like the reuse at a more micro level, doing some of the variables and things like that, all LMSs are not necessarily able to do that. And so most of the time, again, my clients as well will output from DITA into a delivery mechanism like Moodle to deliver their content, so that the training is tracked, which is really what the learning management system's primary role is, to track that people have indeed taken the training and passed their assessments.
Excellent, thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Amber. The last question that has come in is it correct that the learning elements can only be used within a special learning map? For example, I have existing content and I want to include some assessments in the topics without rewriting the whole thing. Is that doable?
Yes, it is. And the learning maps are there if you want to create learning modules and they validate for the order and the hierarchy. You can use a straight DITA map, use a topic ref, and simply reference the appropriate assessment items and be able to organize them like any other map with other content.
Thank you, and then my apologies, this last question just came in, and it is, how do I generate context-sensitive help outputs using DITA?
So from a context-sensitive, the primary way that you're going to want to do that would be in your particular topic that corresponds to a location within your software or something like that. There's in the prologue, there is an element called resource ID, and you would create a unique ID for that particular topic using that particular element. That element also has what application does it apply to. So then working with your programming team that needs to display the context sensitive topic, you would need to provide those IDs to the program so that they would know which topic to access. But it's the resource ID element is the key piece for you to create context sensitivity.
Great, thank you, Amber. Thank you, Dawn. We do want to remind everybody, if you haven't, that the Industry Trend Survey will be closing on Thursday, March 1st. If you haven't taken the survey as of yet, please feel free to do so. The URL's beneath. You will be receiving an email tomorrow giving you this URL as well as the URL to see the infographic for the training and learning survey. And I do want to thank, again, you, Amber, and you, Dawn, for this very informative webinar. And we'd like to thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. This will conclude today's broadcast. And everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.